When Jake moved to a peaceful lakeside town, he just wanted to escape the noise of the city. But when the HOA ordered him to move his boat, they made one big mistake. They didn't know. He didn't just own the house. He owned the entire lake. What started as a letter turned into a battle of power, secrets, and revenge. And Jake? He had a plan they never saw coming. Jake Mercer had never been a man of chaos. After 15 years of building tech startups in the concrete jungle of Chicago, he'd finally walked away. The city, once thrilling, had turned into a cage of boardroom battles, burnout, and betrayal. So when the chance came to buy a rundown property miles away from the nearest Starbucks, he didn't hesitate. He found it by accident. A lakeside house, tucked behind thick rows of pine near a barely visible road outside Langston Hollow, population 1248. The listing was vague, and the photos were grainy. But what sold Jake wasn't the house, it was the water. A private lake, the agent had said. Untouched, deep, secluded. The first morning Jake woke there, he stood on the creaking dock, sipping coffee as fog slithered across the lake's glassy surface. The water was like a mirror, still and perfect. His old wooden boat, refurbished himself over a year of late nights, floated quietly, anchored to a rope he tied with hands that once typed code at 90 words a minute. The silence was addictive. No honking, no meetings, no people. Just him, the birds, and the lake. He would take the boat out every evening, sometimes with a book, sometimes just lying back watching the stars shimmer above the waterline. The lake wasn't just a feature. It was therapy. It was the only place where Jake could hear his thoughts without flinching. The locals, what few there were, kept to themselves. A nod at the gas station, a howdy at the diner, but no one asked questions. Jake liked it that way. He was healing, rebuilding, becoming human again. He even named the boat Luna, after the dog he had growing up, the only thing he truly missed from his childhood. Her name now glimmered in silver cursive along the boat's side, just above, the polished wood that gleamed under the sun. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Then, on the third Tuesday after he moved in, something odd happened. He noticed a drone. It hovered for less than 5 seconds. Word above the tree line, blinked, twice, and vanished. Jake stood on his deck, coffee in hand, watching the sky where it disappeared. He frowned but said nothing. The next morning, a man in khakis knocked on his door with a clipboard and a practiced smile. "Mr. Mercer? I'm Alan from the Lakeside Estates HOA. Just dropping by to introduce myself." "HOA?" Jake blinked. "I didn't realize this place even had one." "Oh, we're mostly behind the ridge," Alan said, pointing vaguely west. "The association covers the properties around the lake. You're within our jurisdiction." Jake stared at him. "Jurisdiction? Anyway," Alan continued, "lovely place you've got here. But small issue. We noticed your boat. Boats aren't technically allowed on the lake. Community rules." Jake's smile vanished. "You're saying I can't put my own boat in the lake I live next to?" Alan chuckled awkwardly, as if Jake had just misunderstood. "Well, it's not really about where you live. The lake is part of common grounds, shared property. We like to keep it uniform." Jake didn't respond, but something in his chest shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, colder, a feeling he hadn't had since leaving the city. He was being watched, and someone thought they could control him again. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Jake found the envelope tucked into his mailbox 4 days after Alan's visit. No stamp, no address, just a plain white slip of paper, with Lakeside Estates HOA printed in blocky font across the top. He opened it with a sigh, already expecting the worst. Notice of violation. You are in breach of Lakeside Estates Community Ordinance. Nokshu 14b. Unauthorized use of community property, specifically, storage and operation of a personal watercraft on shared lakefront territory. You are hereby ordered to remove your boat, Luna, from the lake within 72 hours or face escalating fines and legal action. No signature, no phone number, just a threat typed in Times New Roman. Jake stared at the letter for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his grip. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something about the tone clawed at him. The language wasn't about neighbors, it was about ownership, control. We own this, you don't. That night Jake sat by the lake with Luna moored beside him, the letter folded neatly in his lap. The moonlight painted ripples across the water like glass veins. He remembered what Alan said. Community grounds. It didn't make sense. The real estate agent had never mentioned an HOA. The property had been listed as private, hadn't it? He called the number from the realtor's card the next morning. No answer, just a dead tone and static. Frustrated, Jake decided to visit the HOA office in person. It was a squat, tan building beside a defunct mini-golf course, its parking lot cracked and weed-choked. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A woman with glasses too large for her face sat behind a plexiglass barrier, typing with the speed of someone who didn't want to be interrupted. "I'm looking for Alan," Jake said. She barely looked up. "He's in a meeting." "Then I'll..." "Wait." 10 minutes later, Alan appeared. He walked like a man who had never been challenged, puffed chest, fake calm, and a clipboard he clutched like a badge. "Jake," he said with that rehearsed grin. "Did you get our notice?" "I did. I came here to tell you, you're wrong." Alan blinked. "Excuse me? I own that property, including the dock, including the part of the lake it touches." Alan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me make something clear, Jake. You bought a house near a shared lake. It doesn't matter how close it is. Everyone here plays by the same rules. You're not special." There it was. Jake didn't reply. He stared at Alan for a long moment, then turned and walked out. As he drove home, something shifted inside him. A realization, heavy and cold. This wasn't about a boat. This was a game, and someone thought he didn't know the rules. But Jake wasn't some city boy lost in the woods. He'd fought off investors, rebuilt failing companies, and seen men like Alan crack under pressure. He knew how power worked. Back at home, he poured himself a whiskey, opened his laptop, and pulled up the original deed from the property purchase. There it was, a line most people would miss. Parcel includes all adjacent water rights, as previously recorded in Registry Deed 1982 LC 47. Water rights, his rights. And just like that, Jake realized something very important. They had no idea who they were messing with. Jake didn't sleep that night. The letter had lit a fire inside him, and Alan's smug warning only fed it. He kept turning over the words in his head. "You're not special," the way he said it, like a judge passing sentence. But Jake had learned long ago, the louder someone tries to flex authority, the more likely they're hiding a crack in the foundation. So Jake started digging. He pulled every file he had from the closing packet, flipped through paper after paper, with a surgical eye. Mortgage docs, disclosure forms, the original survey map. Then, something odd. One document was slightly misaligned in the folder. Not scanned, but copied. A low-res printout of an older, typewritten page. Registry Deed, 1982 LC 47, Jake. Squinted. The formatting was clunky, but the words were there, clear as day. The water body known as Raven Lake, including all shorelines and rights of usage, remains the sole property of the parcel holder listed in Title Ref. 1982 LC 47 until legal. Transfer is recorded via county registry. He froze. This wasn't just a right to access the lake. This was ownership of the lake. He grabbed his phone and searched the deed number in the county's public land records. The search bar blinked for a moment. Then, there it was. The transfer had never occurred. No secondary sale, no HOA listing, no override in property law. Jake Mercer, by way of his purchase from the previous owner, owned Raven Lake outright. He let out a breath and leaned back in his chair, stunned. For a few seconds, he just stared at the screen, heart pounding in his ears. They had no idea. The HOA had been operating under the assumption that the lake was public or commonly held. But legally, it wasn't. No paperwork backed their claim. No authority gave them dominion over it. They'd built a paper crown and called it law. Jake chuckled softly. Checkmate. Still, something didn't sit right. Why hadn't the HOA caught this? Why had no one challenged it before? The next morning, Jake drove down to the county office. He wanted this confirmed, on record. A clerk named Martin helped him print an official title history. It matched what Jake had seen. Funny, Martin said, tapping the document. This kind of thing happens more than you'd think. Small towns get lazy. Associations assume control. Nobody checks the old titles. Jake nodded slowly. What would happen if someone started enforcing those rights? Now? Martin raised an eyebrow. Well, if you're the legal owner, you can do whatever you want with it. Access, restrictions, even sue for trespassing. Jake walked out with a certified copy of the deed clutched in hand. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating. That night, he walked to the edge of the lake, Luna gently rocking beside the dock, and stared across the water. Birdsong echoed in the distance. The breeze brushed the trees. Somewhere across the lake, porch lights blinked on. His neighbors. The same ones who sat quietly while the HOA issued threats. Jake whispered to himself, let's see how they like playing by my rules. But first, he'd give them a chance to come clean. The next day, Jake mailed a letter to the HOA. Not angry, not aggressive, just official. Dear Board, attached is the deed for Raven Lake, showing exclusive ownership rights dating back to 1982. Please update your records accordingly. As the current and sole owner of Raven Lake, I will be reviewing all prior HOA communications and actions related to the lake property. Sincerely, Jake Mercer. No threats, just facts. It was the calm before the storm. That night, Jake heard something, rustling outside. He stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the shadows near the tree line. There, at the edge of the woods, was a silhouette, watching him. And then, it vanished. Jake didn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. Jake didn't want a war. He wanted respect. And if there was one thing life in the corporate trenches had taught him, it was this. The best revenge doesn't come in fury. It comes dressed in order and calm. He waited 3 days after sending the letter. 3 silent days. No call, no visit, no apology. So Jake began to move. It started with signs. Handcrafted, polished cedar planks staked at every path leading to the lake. Bold white lettering read, Private Lake. Access by permit only. Property of J. Mercer. The signs included a QR code that led to a sleek little web page Jake whipped up overnight. It explained the history of the lake, included the official deed, and allowed users to apply for an access pass, free but limited. Each application required a reason for access and an agreement to new usage rules. Fishing. Allowed on weekends. Swimming. Sure, between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. boating, only with written permission from the property owner, Jake. It was fair, clear, legal, and it sent a message. By the end of the week, Jake had received over 30 requests from nearby homeowners. Some were polite, others not so much. One man even tried to include a bribe, a generous donation wrapped in a thank you card. Jake approved most of them, gracefully, thoughtfully, on his terms. Then came the HOA. Alan returned, this time without the clipboard. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You're turning neighbors against each other." Jake stood calmly by the dock, arms crossed. "No, Alan, I'm enforcing property rights. You know, those things your letters keep ignoring?" Alan's jaw twitched. "We're escalating this to legal action." "Please do," Jake said. He pulled a folder from his bag and handed over a certified document. "This is a cease and desist. I'm formally demanding that the HOA retract all lake-related regulations from your charter. You don't own it. Never did." Alan barely looked at it before tossing it back. "You're playing a dangerous game." Jake stepped closer, voice low. "No, I'm just better at it than you." By week's end, whispers spread like wildfire. Jake Mercer, the guy with the boat and the clean-cut smirk, had flipped the entire HOA playbook, and people, real people, were starting to notice. Retirees who loved fishing started thanking him. Kids who used to be yelled at for skipping rocks now waved at Jake like he was the mayor. The shift was subtle but unstoppable. The HOA, desperate to save face, called an emergency meeting. Jake attended. He wasn't invited, but he walked in anyway, dressed in jeans and a casual black blazer, the deed framed under one arm. The room went silent as he placed the frame on the table gently. "Like a trophy. Let me be clear," he said. "I'm not your enemy, but I won't be bullied. If you'd asked nicely, we wouldn't be here." Alan sat fuming. A few members avoided Jake's gaze. One woman actually applauded. Jake smiled faintly. "This isn't about power, it's about truth. And maybe it's time someone held the HOA accountable for once." He left without another word. That night, an anonymous post on the town's online bulletin board read, "The man who owns the lake did more for us in a week than the HOA has in 10 years. Jake read it on his phone, standing at the dock. Lunas, ropes taut in the wind. He didn't smile. Not yet, because he knew, when you take power from people who never earned it, they don't fade quietly. And as calm as the lake seemed, something was still lurking beneath. The community hall buzzed with tension. Plastic chairs scraped against the floor. Residents muttered in tight clusters, eyes darting toward the podium like prey watching a wolf circle. For years, the HOA had ruled this lakeside community with quiet tyranny, masking control as order, threat as policy. Tonight, that curtain was coming down. Jake arrived precisely on time. Calm, unarmed, except for a leather-bound folder under his arm and a smirk that said he already knew how this would end. Alan stood stiffly at the front. His suit was darker than usual, more severe. His smile, forced. The rest of the HOA board sat behind him like pale chess pieces, unsure which direction they were allowed to move. Jake walked up the center aisle. Every head turned. Someone whispered, "That's him." Alan cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind attendees. This meeting is for discussion, not declarations." Jake didn't stop walking. He stepped up beside the podium and placed his folder on the table. Then, without a word, he pulled out the framed deed, propped it upright, and turned to face the crowd. "Let's skip the speech," Jake said, voice clear and even. "I'm not here to argue, I'm here to end this." Alan stepped forward, voice rising. "Mr. Mercer, this is still private property under HOA jurisdiction. You've been warned about disrupting meetings." Jake reached into the folder again. "What you call disruption, the county calls evidence." He pulled out 3 documents, certified copies of the original 1982 deed, the property transfer, and a recent letter from the county recorder affirming his legal ownership of Raven Lake. In full. He placed them on the projector. The room dimmed. On the screen, in black and white legal clarity, were the words "Sole Rights Holder, Jacob Mercer. No HOA or municipal claim registered on Raven Lake or adjoining shorelines." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Alan tried to regain control. Even if that's true, the HOA reserves the right to interpret communal guidelines under subsection. "Stop," Jake said sharply, turning toward him. He pointed to the screen. "This isn't a guideline. It's a deed. This lake doesn't belong to a board of strangers. It belongs to me. And for years, you've enforced rules on a property you never had the right to touch." Alan's face reddened. A vein in his temple pulsed. "I should sue," Jake continued, "for harassment, for unauthorized control, for every fine threat and lie." The room went dead quiet. Then Jake inhaled and shifted gears. "But I won't." Murmurs. "I didn't come here to burn this place down. I came to make it better. So here's what I'm offering. To every resident who applied for a lake access pass respectfully, your passes are now permanent. Free. For life." Gasps turned to applause. Jake wasn't done. "And for the rest of you, those bullied by this board, silenced, fined for nonsense, I'm calling for a community vote. Right now. Let's decide, once and for all, if this HOA deserves to exist." Alan shouted something, but it was drowned by a rising chant. "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Someone passed out slips of paper. Others raised their hands in protest, but it was already over. In 15 minutes, the results were tallied. Percent voted to disband the HOA. Jake stood quietly as the board members slinked out, avoiding eye contact. Alan was the last to leave, but before he did, he turned back and muttered, "This isn't over." Jake gave a small smile. "No, Alan, it just is, and that's what's killing you." Later that night, Jake stood alone at the lake's edge, moonlight glinting off the calm water. Peace had returned, not just to the lake, but to the people. He didn't need a title or a podium. He had something better: control without cruelty, power with restraint, and behind every calm ripple of Raven Lake was the quiet strength of the man who truly owned it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.